Well, that was, by the standards of anyone, a superb All-Ireland hurling final last weekend, and let us hope that this weekend is just as kind. I watched it, of all places, in the Hare and Hounds, Manchester, en route to Heaton Park, and if you're going to Croke Park for that in a few weeks, you're in for a treat too. It was amazing, actually, to watch it somewhere else. A great pub, people from both counties in attendance before we went off to watch the lads from O'Sheen's GAA club do so well on the stage. And the one misfortune of being over there in Manchester watching the All-Ireland was missing the chance to go to Talbot Street and document a tradition which forms our subject today. When Tipperary reach an All-Ireland final, their fans will begin the day in the capital with a solemn commemoration on Talbot Street at the location where Seán Treacy, one of the leaders of the 3rd Tipperary Brigade, was killed in a shootout in October 1920. And it's something you might have stumbled on, if you're ever going through town on the morning of an All-Ireland final, if they're in it. A large crowd from Tip, their colours flying in the breeze. And they sing songs from the Premier County that are speeches, a piper, a decade of the Rosary, all of that. But every dimension of it, as we'll hear today, honours the past in some way. It's a really interesting event for lots of reasons, but one of the things I find most intriguing about it is that rather than fading away with time, which sometimes happens to these kind of rituals, it's actually become more popular. Maybe some of that's owed to the social media age and the ability to promote events, which is easier now. I mean, if you Google it, you'll see clips from last week's commemoration all over the internet. And I think even across other sporting codes, there are traditions which have had a great resurgence in recent times. When Shamrock Rovers appear in an FAI Cup final, for example, in Lansdowne Road, some of their fans gather in Ringsend, the spiritual home of the club, in some ways the spiritual home of football in Dublin, Ringsend, and they march there to Lansdowne Road behind a white horse. And internationally, there are lots of traditions like this on match days where fans gather and do something that's important to their own heritage. But I think what makes the Seán Treacy tradition so interesting is that actually, as we'll hear today, this goes right back to the Irish Revolution itself, a time when the capital city was still in ruins. Talbot Street these days is often on the receiving end of bad publicity. And when you put Talbot Street into Google and you see the suggested options, they include Talbot Street crime, is Talbot Street safe, Talbot Street dangerous, and Talbot Street incident. But here is an event of great positivity and tradition kept alive through intergenerational involvement, which brings joy to many, and indeed brings joy to Talbot Street. And All-Ireland Sundays, days of such collective joy, are made better by people coming together, whether they're going to the match or not. So our story today in some ways begins in Solihead Beg, but it culminates in the success of Tipperary last week. My guests are Niamh Hassett, who got in touch with me with a great idea for an episode. Her father, historian John Hassett, was central to the Talbot Street All-Ireland Day commemoration over many, many years, and also to organising commemorations in Tipperary of the War of Independence. John passed in 2019, and the torch has well and truly been handed on. And I'm also joined by Seán Nugent, someone not alone centrally involved in this commemoration, but at the heart and soul of Gaelic games and their administration in Tipperary. I doubt there's much about hurling in Tipperary that Seán doesn't know. I particularly enjoy these kinds of episodes, the intersection of Dublin and other places. So hello to any new listeners down there in Tipperary who made the leap from the two Johnnies to Three Castles Burning for the day. Here's hoping for an All-Ireland football final that matches the hurlers for intensity. Thanks as ever to everyone who tunes into the podcast. A special thank you to those who support it on Patreon. On the very day that the first Dáil met in Dublin's Mansion House, the opening shots of the War of Independence were fired in Tipperary, unbeknownst to the TDs meeting on Dawson Street and to the horror of a fair few of them. On a quiet rural road in Tipperary, the course of Irish history was transformed by a small band of men from the ranks of the 3rd Tipperary Brigade. There's been considerable debate over just what instigated their actions that day, and the war that followed on. Seamus Robinson, a 1916 veteran and one of the men involved in the Salahead Beg ambush, he later remembered that, look, the finer details, they're for the historians to work out. History, he wrote, is for historians to write. Those of us who were involved in the making of our recent history were, and are still, like the storied man in the forest who couldn't see the wood for the trees. We were so intimately and urgently wrapped up in vital and mortal details that we had no time or opportunity, whatever about our inclination, to stand and stare. But the facts of history are pretty straightforward. Men from the ranks of the Royal Irish Constabulary, the RIC, were transporting geligonite, ambushed by a party. 2 RIC men are killed. An unapologetic Dan Breen, one of the ambushing party, later remembered, "We took the action deliberately, having thought over the matter and talked it over between us. Treacy stated to me that the only way of starting a war was to kill someone, and we wanted to start a war. So we intended to kill some of the police who we looked upon as the foremost and most important branch of the enemy forces. The only regret we had following the ambush was that there were only 2 policemen in it instead of the 6 we had expected." Harsh words. You might be thinking, the harsh words of a young man. Well, no. And later in life, Breen felt much the same.
I don't make any bones about killing. Anyone that comes into my house or my country and tries to take over by force, I'm going to kill him, and I'll use any and every means to do it. And I'm saying that now in the winter of my life. I've met a week, an hour to live or a day to live or a year, and I am not one bit sorry for it. To any man or God.
Tipperary began the war, and Tipperary led on from the front. And while initially I think the IRA leadership in Dublin were a little bit annoyed by everything, in time they came to embrace the fighting power and the leading approach of Tipperary Republicans. Seamus Robinson later said, "Volunteers all over the country were as prepared, as anxious and as willing as we were to see the ball start rolling, and would have started it in similar circumstances." Seán Treacy not alone participated in the Salahead Beg ambush, he came from Salahead Beg. And the ambush there marked the beginning of his frontline involvement in the conflict, which became no less dramatic with time. And sometimes people in the War of Independence are involved in a high-profile ambush and they kind of deliberately fade into the background for a little while after, but that wasn't the way it was with the 3rd Tipperary Brigade. In May 1919, Treacy took part in a successful effort to rescue fellow IRA leader Sean Hogan from custody at Knocklong Station, during which 2 police constables were killed and Treacy himself was shot. And in the high-intensity weeks and months that followed, Treacy was active in the capital and in Tipperary, narrowly avoiding capture during a vicious firefight in Drumcondra, which again left men dead. And you can read all about the exploits of the Tipperary men in Dan Breen's memoir, My Fight for Irish Freedom. It's like a great adventure story. In October 1920, Treacy was caught up in a firefight in Talbot Street with Gilbert Price, part of a British Secret Service surveillance team monitoring the Republican outfitters and seeking wanted men in the capital. That's an extraordinary name for a shop, isn't it? In a city in the grips of a revolution, the Republican outfitters. And it was owned by Padder Clancy, a man who the authorities were watching very, very closely. One worker for Dáil Éireann, based just up the road, remembered North Earl Street was a dangerous street for the Dáil department to be functioning in, with the constant raids, searchings and shootings that were such a feature of that locality. Further down in Talbot Street, which of course was merely a continuation of North Earl Street, was Padder Clancy's drapery stores, very conspicuously labelled the Republican Outfitters. That place was the subject of constant raids. I remember well the famous raid in October 1920, resulting in the death of Seán Treacy. In the safety of our rooms, we watched that desperate fight about 150 yards further down the street. The bodies of both Seán Treacy and the Agent Price were photographed lying in Talbot Street. And while the conflict was primarily being fought in rural terrain, like Tipperary, this was a reminder that a war of espionage was being fought on the streets of the capital as well. An intelligence war. And if the war in rural Ireland was all about the rifle, well, this was the war of the handgun. Sean Brunswick, a Republican who was present in the immediate aftermath of the shooting, he remembered that sight of the dead Seán Treacy. I went over to him and blood was trickling down his face. I searched his pockets. His gun was gone, but anything I found in his pockets I transferred to my own. Ammunition, pens, dispatches and a field message book. You'll sometimes see these amazing pictures that claim to show the shootout between Price and Seán Treacy. They're actually footage, they're stills from Irish Destiny, a 1926 silent film. But the fact that they included the shootout that killed Seán Treacy in that film tells you everything about the moment. Treacy became one of the martyrs of the conflict, and in some ways he was one of its most significant martyrs because he later transcended all divisions in Tipperary. You know, in a song like The Galtee Mountain Boy, we meet many of the men Seán Treacy had once fought beside, but they were fighting new opponents, you know, arrested by Free Staters and sentenced for to die. Farewell to Tipperary, said the Galtee Mountain Boy. That song was written by Patsy O'Halloran. It's actually him singing it here in Chalk's pub in Clonmel, thanks to Tom O'Mahony, who uploaded this amazing clip.
Marched across the valleys and over the hill tops green, where we met with Dinny Lacy, Sean Hogan and Dan Breen, Sean Moyle and his gallant men. Oh, they kept that flag flying high. Ah, goodbye to Tipperary, said the Galtee Mountain Boy.
But Treacy was dead before any division in the ranks, so he was a unifying figure in commemoration. And Desmond Ryan, historian, veteran of the Easter Rising, he wrote in 1940 that 20 years after Seán Treacy's death, his very name is sufficient to dissipate many dark clouds of disappointment and disillusion amongst those who knew him, to bridge Civil War differences, to dispel the questionings and weariness with which many regard the aftermath of the recent war of Ireland. So what began the Seán Treacy commemoration on Talbot Street? And as Sean explained to me, it goes right back. It goes all the way back, really, to the immediate aftermath of the Rising in terms of Tipperary commemorating the Easter Rising in Dublin. But in terms of remembering Seán Treacy specifically, he talks about the 1922 All-Ireland final. And confusingly, it was actually played in September 1923 because, you know, there were a lot of things going on at the time.
Well, the origins of it really go back to, I suppose, to 1922. And previous to that, Johnny Leahy, who was the captain of the Tipperary team, he was captain for quite a few years. But in I think it was in 1917, they also went to the ruins of the GPO and walked from Houston Station. Obviously, Seán Treacy was alive and kicking at that time. So that they done that, I think, in 1917. Tipperary won that final. I think it was their 9th All-Ireland. But then in 1922, Tipperary got to the All-Ireland final. But because of the troubles and, you know, the Civil War and that sort of thing, the final was delayed until the 9th of September, 1923. And Johnny Leahy again was captain of Tipperary. So he brought his men by train to Houston Station. Now, they walked from Houston Station to the GPO. They could have taken a tram, but they didn't take the tram out of annoyance at the tram company who were treating workers not so very good, like around that time, and that was the reason they didn't take a tram. They done. There's a little bit of a protest. They walked GPO. They stood in silence at the GPO, and then they went on to Talbot Street, to where Seán Treacy was gunned down, and they said prayers, and they went to Cork Park. Then went on up to Cork Park. So only about 10 minutes walk, I suppose, from Talbot Street to Cork Park. But unfortunately, the day didn't end well that day, and that Kilkenny beat them in the final. And the good news, though, after that was Kilkenny failed to beat Tipperary from that day, 9th of September 1923, until 1967. They failed to beat them in a championship game.
For Niamh Hassett, attending this commemoration has been a core memory of her own youth. And I think this is often the case. You're going to something like this as a child. It's only really later on you realise the importance of it all.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, my memory, was it 89, Sean? That was the uh, Tipperary's first All Ireland in
In
years.
18 years nearly, yeah.
Yeah. So I
Right.
I might have been alive for the previous one, but I didn't remember it. So
Yeah.
going up to Dublin and going to the Seán Treacy commemoration with my dad before going to the match was, just like, I suppose you don't appreciate it at the time, and you're kind of going, it's cold, or whatever, and you have to stand here and listen to all these people you don't know talking. But now I look back, and like all the other commemorations he dragged me to over the years, I'm just so delighted that I was there, that I can say I was there for it. And it's very special, and he was the heart and soul of it for so long. And it's lovely that, I think the mark of a great commemoration, as you say, when it continues on, and the Sean and Liam O'Donoghue are doing such an amazing job organising it, and there's people, they have people lined up as well. It's going to continue because the tradition is so strong, and everybody will turn up to the centenary. But Marcus Howard once said to me, "It's the 101st.
Yes.
That's the one." How many people show up to that? That's the measure of how it's going to last. And 2016 and 2019 were really important dates when Tip got into the All Ireland. But 2025, not it's not got the resonance of those years, and the biggest crowd we had yet. It's just wonderful.
Structurally, some of what takes place now is just as it was in the 1920s when that Tip team began it. There's the singing these days of Tipperary So Far Away, a song that might not be familiar to Dubliners.
Yeah, the other thing I suppose that makes it unique, Donal, is that there's also the singing of Tipperary So Far Away, which was a song written by Paddy Breathnach about Seán Treacy. And it's not like Sliabh na Mán. Not everybody in Tipperary knows the words of it, but everybody can sing the chorus. And that has become a really, strong part of it. But yeah, it's got what we would class in Tipperary as a sort of standard commemoration program with it. It ticks all the boxes there. But I think um, the proclamation gives it its link to 1916, obviously. And the Rosary gives the link to the hurlers, the original people who spontaneously commemorated Seán Treacy on Talbot Street in 1923. So it's really, really powerful.
Softly, gently he raised his head up from the cold, cold ground. Softly, gently, comrade, he cried, no longer on earth can I stay. I will never more roam to my own native home. It's Tipperary so far away.
Now that's from the Clancy brothers, but over many decades it was the singing of Paddy Dwyer that was familiar on Talbot Street. And singers naturally open up discussion on the challenges of rolling up with several hundred people or 1,000 people. There's the bands, there's the public address system, everything else are all part and parcel of the day.
So Paddy Dwyer was his name, and he had, I suppose, a unique kind of a way of style of singing it. Like, and it was very attractive, really. Like, and it captures people. The way he done it. But Paddy, unfortunately, has gone to his eternal award. And another feature of probably more recent years was it wasn't so much that we got bands on that to play there, but they offered to come. Now, Derek Warfield offered to come in 2019, and it was helpful to us because one of the biggest problems we often had was getting public address. John Hassett was great. He used to arrange that with some cultoscope, but sometimes they'd come late. Sometimes it wouldn't work when it came. I was awful, and I know it was 16 or 19, 16, I think. I was awful annoyed with the thing. It wouldn't work, and we were hitting it and plugging in things, plugging out things. And eventually, you could nearly be heard all over Dublin. It did work.
Yeah.
So we had some of those problems. But Derek Warfield, anyway, he arrived on with his band. He had been played in Cavan the night before. When they came back late in the morning, about 3 o'clock in the morning from Cavan, and he came up in the morning there and he set up all the gear, and they sang a few songs there. And this year, then Rebel Hearts, who are a Tipperary band, are from Clonulty Osmore. Their father would be very active in the GA. They offered to come.
The centenary of the death of Seán Treacy occurred in October 2020. And of course, the COVID pandemic impacted enormously on the decade of centenaries across the country. Personally, I think the GAA, they did a really good job of seizing on, for example, the Bloody Sunday anniversary. In the context of the pandemic, they couldn't do what they probably had intended to do. But if you have an empty stadium, use that. And they used it brilliantly. And Roy Curtis wrote about it so brilliantly and evocatively in the Irish Independent. He wrote a powerful, evocative, classy and deeply moving ceremony set the perfect tone on a landmark night. As Brendan Gleeson delivered a touching roll call of the butchered, 14 torches were illuminated in an otherwise entirely blacked out Croke Park, each shimmering beacon relighting a life extinguished 100 years ago. A specially commissioned, hauntingly tender piece of music, more than a game, punctured the silence. It touched the marrow and invaded the soul. The GAA, Roy wrote, excel at moments like this. This was solemn, dignified, eloquent, and extraordinarily rousing. Most of all, it was beautiful, truly beautiful. Only Roy can write like that these days. And the centenary of Seán Treacy's passing also happened against the same backdrop of this a few weeks earlier, but they managed to make the most of it with a ceremony online and simultaneously those who were in Dublin on Talbot Street.
Did a live Zoom for Seán Treacy on the 14th of October 2020. And we had some people on Talbot Street filming from there as well, and then everybody else at home socially isolating. But it was actually lovely. That's online, Donald. So yeah, it was quite nice. We had to just make do with what we could, but we marked it as well as we could.
Each year, when Tipperary reached the final, a speaker is invited to say something on the morning at the event. This year, the honour befell the busiest man in Dublin that morning. Can't imagine it's easy to get Jarlath Burns, president of the GAA, on the phone on the morning of an All-Ireland hurling final. But he came down, he spoke. He said, we gather not only to remember Seán Treacy, but to honour all that he stood for.
We asked Jarlath Burns this year to do it. And the busiest day for the president of the GAA is the day of the All-Ireland, because he has a whole lot of functions to do. And Jarlath said, I'd be absolutely honoured to do it. I'll just have to do some kind of a balancing act to be there at 12 o'clock. And he appeared out of nowhere at 12. He done his oration and he disappeared instantly,
So when you're passing down Talbot Street, stop at the Wooden Whisk, which is number 94. That's 2 doors from Lidl. And you'll notice a plaque between the windows on the second floor. It was unveiled in September 1937 by the National Graves Association, and Andrew Cooney, who'd once served as IRA Chief of Staff, unveiled the plaque. And the unveiling of the Treacy plaque brought thousands of people onto the streets. But the National Graves Association, the people who put it up there, also launched a campaign to have the street renamed from Talbot Street to Seán Treacy Street. That campaign ebbed and flowed over subsequent decades. A letter actually appears in the Indo in April 1944 from a confused member of the public. When passing down Talbot Street the other day, I was surprised to see the printed words Shráid Seán I Trasig, Seán Treacy Street, high up on the wall, pasted over the ordinary Talbot Street nameplate. As I've not heard of any indication recently that Dublin Corporation has sanctioned the changing of the name of Talbot Street, I was astonished to see the change already carried out. But this was an act of protest. The corporation had actually voted to change the name of Talbot Street to Seán Treacy Street, but the rent payers of the street voted by an overwhelming majority not to rename the street. The Irish Press newspaper was horrified by that. Street names in Dublin, they said, are used to commemorate foreign pro-councils or titled non-entities. The Rutlands, the Mountjoys, the Brunswicks, the Ormonds, the Talbots, and the rest. These are not names we remember with any particular pride. But I think the primary reason the rentpayers voted against the name change was, one, they argued Seán Treacy Street might be confused with Sean McDermott Street. And secondly, I think the name was just so well established in Dublin commercial circles. It would be very difficult to convince a shop on Grafton Street to vote to change the name of Grafton Street either. And of the 100 business premises in the street, the name change was defeated by a vote of 30 against to just 3 in favour. But for many years, some campaigned for a more fitting memorial, at least, to Seán Treacy on the street. But the physicality of the street, amongst other things, has made that difficult.
In advance, we'll say, of the 100th anniversary, Kathleen Cleary, who was a close relative of Seán Treacy, she led the case for maybe a monument to Seán Treacy in Talbot Street. The street isn't that wide there, you know, and that would create a bit of difficulty. There were various suggestions of putting it down on the ground on the footpath, but then again, that would be worn away over years. Like that was kind of dismissed, that idea, and there was an idea maybe about putting up a much better type of a plaque up on the wall. As someone remarked to me there last Sunday, and they always do, the Seán Treacy's name is spelled wrong on the plaque. That's there, and it's only a small plaque. But then Kathleen unfortunately lost her life in an accident, and that kind of not finished that there for the moment. But it's something that we might have a look at again, because that plaque, you pass by there now and not hardly see that plaque.
No, I mean, it's great that it's there, but it's very high up, and unless you were looking for it, you wouldn't see it. Yeah, you have to know
No.
where it is.
You'd have to know where it is.
Another piece of Tipperary history not too far away, in what was once the so-called Monto, Philip Shanahan's public house, which was an important meeting point or rendezvous for the 3rd Tipperary Brigade during the War of Independence. Dan Breen remembered the lady prostitutes used to pinch the guns and ammunition from the Ogsies and Tans and leave them for us at Phil Shanahan's public house. I might add there was no such thing as payment for these transactions, and any information they had, they gave us. Philip himself had once hurled for Tipperary in his youth. So I had to ask a question that I've always wondered about tip pubs in Dublin. Why are there so many? And another ritual, of course, is the touring of the Victorious Cup to long-established Tipperary institutions in the capital. The Dubs will always take Sam to the Boar's Head, but for Tipperary, it's the Palace Bar on Fleet Street.
There are a lot of Tipperary publicans. Well, they may not be as many now, but there are a lot of Tipperary publicans in Dublin. There's another one there across the road from Bosaurus, Ryan's there, fine place now. The Palace Bar, as you said, there was another one there, and it was owned by some of the Ryans from Hollyford. It was there near Hawkins House, across the road from Hawkins House. And yeah, there's a good lot more. But
thank you so much, as ever, for tuning in to this edition of the Three Castles Burning podcast. Hope you enjoyed that one. Enjoy the big match as well. I'll be back soon with a new episode. Until then, slán go fóill.